So a long time ago, I was tripping on acid, and sort of like this vision came apparent to me, which was the demand side of economics. So there's no consumer union. There used to be unions for work, like the Teamster Union, which was like a bunch of truckers basically banding together to like work for higher wages. There was, I don't know if there still is, a union for like port workers, like people that work at docks and whatnot. There's been a lot of type of unions for people who work jobs, right? There's, I think, a fairly strong teachers union that still exists. And so a union is just a group of people that band together for their rights, right? But there's no consumer union. There's no demand side union where consumers can sort of band together and be like, no, we don't want to pay these higher prices. We don't want to, pay $6 for this small little trinket. And it's a matter of deciding where to collectively shop and what benefits you get out of it or your community gets out of it. And now with the advent of social media and how transparent things are and how prevalent mobile phones are as well as surveillance, it's totally possible to sort of like reinforce a consumer spending union, right? Back in 2011 or 2010, when I had that vision, it wasn't possible. So I think the big question for like the left wing, besides housing and immigration and whatnot, is this consumer union, right? And no one's talking about it. No one's even thought about it. It doesn't even exist in the general ether sphere. You know what I mean? Of like thoughts and ideas. But if people banded together and spent money together for like specific causes, you could get a Walmart funding a local park. You know what I mean? Or night classes, or I don't know, a Walmart funding local farmers for more organic food. Farm to table. I don't know. There's a million ideas that stem from that, but there's no idea of a consumer union. Now, could it actually work in the United States because it goes against a bunch of different lobbies? I don't know. I don't think so. But either way, it's food for thought. So to paraphrase, essentially, consumer unions, or where demand side economics goes, are the most important underutilized tool that's not in the common dialectic. So for example, if enough people within one town or community, let's say 50,000 people, agree to band to spend at Walmart, right, a certain amount of income, $200 to $300 per month, and that's guaranteed income, right? And if they don't spend that, they get negatively punished by a reduction in their consumer points or whatever. Then Walmart has that guaranteed income, and from that income, a portion of it can go towards the community. For example, funding a certain couple, let's say like $40,000 to do some homesteading, buying an acre or two, and suddenly they have, fresh raw milk as well as various other fruits, which some of them they can give away to the community. That's just one example, right? Like promoting homesteading. But if you want to promote, for example, helping the homeless, through a corporate drive. Let's say everyone spends at a certain Starbucks and a portion of that money goes towards improving people that live in tent cities or in like Skid Row by, giving them clean needles, condoms, STD testing, some food, as well as medicine and basic psychological and medical care. That's something else you can do. So it's more like community outreach through charitable drives because income is guaranteed. This works a lot better with mom and pop shops than it would with large corporations. And there would definitely be some resistance. But the way to resist that is just a boycott. So, like, one form of resistance would definitely be like Tyson Foods would resist a general homestead movement, or any big corporate food organization or company would resist homesteading. But you can just boycott those products, right? And eventually you could have something that would scan products on your phone and would say, is this product boycottable through this foundation, right? Or is it something you want to spend money towards, right? And I think it's kind of like a mixture of left-wing socialism and libertarianism in some sense. I think this is what should replace all forms of taxes, is essentially consumer drive. For example, like, again, you could use this for quote unquote higher level socioeconomic levels. So, for example, like a Ferrari dealership, if there's guaranteed Ferraris bought by a certain number of wealthy people, some of that money goes towards, I don't know, cleaning a local beach or cleaning a local forest or promoting cleanup, right? But then, for example, you would say, well, how would that be cleaned up, right? So you provide the tools, the money, but then you need the actual manpower, labor. Well, people that don't have income, or let's say they're disabled or can't work, they can do these volunteer drives, right? So like certain people can do homesteading, certain people can go clean up litter, certain people can do these more menial tasks. And eventually this would replace home care, Medicaid, Medicare, and a lot of other, you know, extremely inefficient, corrupt medical programs. So for example, like let's say you have someone that's like, you know, I don't know, 17 years old, they can't find a job. They're given, you know, a minimal level of subsistence income, and then they work for, you know, they go to this old person's house and kind of help take care of them through the day, and they're bought the tools and products they need to help take care of this older person, and that's funded by, like, I don't know, Cisco, or you know, GE, or Walmart, a local Walmart or whatever. You know, it's easy to think of like a local facility that could do that versus a conglomerate corporation that consumers don't really spend at. But nonetheless, this is a system that I envision that's more technocratic and that requires a higher level of tech, because you have to also punish consumers that don't join the lobby or the consumer drive, right? Just as there are people that would cross a union picket line, there are people that would cross the consumer picket line, right? And so you can take this idea and divide it out further, you know, through fractaling, in the sense of like, okay, let's say every Walmart in every state, or these 50 states, you know, puts 1% of its consumer drive income towards, I don't know, a space race or whatever, right? You can combine these streams of income towards like global humanitarian goals, such as reducing CO2 level or world hunger or a housing crisis, homeless crisis, mental health crisis, whatever issue you have. Essentially, my theory is can be entirely funded through these sorts of corporate drive incomes, as long as consumers unite and dictate what they want. So, for example, you have a grocery store that's been there 30 years. Why aren't there solar panels on the top? Because they can't justify the cost. But if people are promising to spend there, then solar panels will be put, and then that reduces fixed costs, and that fixed cost should theoretically go on to the consumers and not through, you know, upper management and into the boardroom. But that's just not how it works. And we have this sort of corporate greed, and we have, you know, the breakdown of just-in-time supply, and then as well as, you know, a tariff marketplace. So we're seeing a cost increase, but as well as other products that really shouldn't go up in price, they are going up in price because every good is going up in price. Therefore, things become unaffordable. So unless there's an actual consumer union to fight against that and redirect that income towards more positive sources, especially towards efficiency like alternative energy, or better customer service programs, or more hands-on training for employees, or more time off, or more maternity leave, we won't see these improvements. Particularly, most importantly, is more automation and reduction in labor hours. So the work week should go from 40 hours down to 38, 36, and eventually somewhere around between 24 to 27 hours is ideally what an ideal work week is. Maybe in the future it can be 14 to 18, but without an extensive unified consumer lobby, consumer union, we won't get any of that. And so I don't think this is a model that we'll see in our lifetimes or anywhere near, because it goes against too many private interests. And so, you know, you could look back to the 60s where the USSR was most competitive with the US. One was a socialistic model, theorized it was communist, but was more socialistic, versus the American capitalist model. The capitalist model has won. And even in a place that claims it's communist, like China, China's more capitalist than America in many senses of the word, in terms of free enterprise. America's more oligarchical and private lobby based, and it's a lot like the Soviet system of the 60s, where there's entrenched lobbies, and rather than governors of a certain province, there's sort of like entrenched capitalists and entrenched families that don't want to give up that power. So we're really not going to see something like this unless there's lobbying on behalf of a consumer union. There's serious boycotts. There's, you know, almost picket lines and sort of like a civil rights movement for this type of organization. But it's not going to come about. But it's something that could reverberate up the chain. And so at the very top, you just replace central banks from fiat debt-based currency to investor-based currency. So, for example, that local grocery store that's been there 30 years that wants solar panels and, let's say, Pfizer electric crystals in the floor mats to create energy efficiency, right, as well as like I don't know, xenon windows to keep the temperature more ambient, these sorts of actual core improvement models to the building itself, as well as passive cooling, right, in the building. These sorts of upgrades that would last, many generations. In order to do that, you could just have investors pile up like 30% of the income, right, needed to do that, backed by consumer drive for however many years. Like this many people in this area predict to spend this much money, and they'll get consumer points from that. But the rest of the 70% of the funding could just be printed, right? And because it leads to an increase in efficiency through that building, it would actually not be necessarily inflationary or that inflationary. But replacing central banks is something that, with particularly who runs central banks, it's not going to happen, right? So that's just my food for thought. And I call this entire model consumer awareness. So